The man was dying in the wrong place at the wrong time, and Prissy Adams could not walk past him. She had tried. She had taken 4 steps beyond the mouth of the alley, her medical bag heavy on her shoulder. The rain coming down in the flat, relentless way it came down in this part of the city when it had decided to mean it. She had seen the shape on the ground, and she had told herself it was not her business. That this neighborhood at this hour produced shapes on the ground with a regularity that could not be solved by one woman with a suture kit and a conscience she had never learned to turn off. She took 4 steps. Then she stopped. Then she went back. He was face down on the wet concrete. Dark coat. Broad shoulders. 2 bullet wounds that she catalogued with the automatic efficiency of someone who had done emergency medicine in worse conditions than a city alley. Entry wound left shoulder. Through and through. Entry wound right side. Still bleeding, which meant something was nicked but not ruptured. She dropped to her knees. She opened her bag. Her hands were shaking. Not from fear. From the cold, and from something else. Something that had been living in her chest for 8 months and had no name except the specific weight of a grief that never fully sat down. But her hands knew what to do even when the rest of her was somewhere else entirely. She worked fast. Pressure first. Then assessment. Then the needle and thread that she carried because she had grown up in a father's clinic on the south side and learned suturing before she learned long division. Her father. She pushed the thought down. She focused on the wound. The man was unconscious. But conscious patients in alleys asked questions she did not want to answer and made decisions she did not want to manage. Unconscious patients held still and let her work. She had him stabilized in 11 minutes. Not fixed. Stabilized. Enough that transport was possible if she could get a vehicle in the next 20. She pulled out her phone. The man's hand closed around her wrist. She startled hard enough that she dropped the phone. It clattered on the wet concrete and the screen cracked, and she looked down at the hand on her wrist and then up at the face that had turned toward her. He was awake. His eyes were open and dark and completely alert in the way of someone who had trained themselves to come back from unconsciousness fast and oriented. As if even being shot could not afford him the luxury of confusion. He looked at her. She looked at him. And her entire body went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the rain. She knew that face. She had seen it once, 8 months ago, through the window of her father's clinic. A man getting out of a black car while 2 others went inside. She had been across the street. She had not understood what she was seeing until the police came 40 minutes later, and her father was gone and the clinic was empty, and her whole life had a before and an after divided by a single Tuesday evening. She knew that face. Oscar Thorne. The man who ran the northern quarter of the city's criminal network with the quiet authority of someone who had never needed to raise his voice because the consequences of crossing him spoke loudly enough without assistance. The man whose name appeared in her father's case files. The files the police had closed without explanation 3 weeks after opening them. She should have let him bleed. She had not let him bleed. His grip on her wrist was surprisingly strong for a man who had lost the amount of blood currently diluting in the puddle beneath him. "You're a doctor," he said. His voice was rough but clear, stating a fact rather than asking a question. "I was passing by," she said. Her voice came out steady. She did not know how. "You saved my life," he said. "Don't read into it," she said. "I save everyone. It's a condition I was born with." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The ghost of one. The expression of a man encountering something unexpected and finding it, against his better judgment, interesting. His eyes moved over her face with the specific attention of a man who catalogued everything and forgot nothing. "What's your name?" he asked. She should have lied. She had a list of lies prepared for exactly this kind of situation. The kind where giving your real name to the wrong person could cost you everything. "Prissy," she said. Her real name. Out of her mouth before she could stop it. "Prissy Adams." He looked at her for 3 more seconds. "Adams," he said. Just that. Just her surname. In the tone of a man placing a piece into a puzzle he has been working on for some time. She felt the cold move deeper. He knew her father's name. Of course he did. 3 weeks after the alley, a car came for her. Not a threatening car. That was the most unsettling part. A clean black vehicle with a driver who opened the door for her and said good evening and offered her water for the journey as if this were a normal appointment she had scheduled. As if being collected from your apartment at 7 in the evening by the associates of the man whose life you saved and whose name was attached to your father's death was a routine social call. Prissy got in the car because the alternative was running and she had nowhere to run that his people could not find her. She had understood this from the moment she gave him her real name in the alley. She had made a decision in that moment and she was living inside its consequences now. The Thorne estate was exactly what she expected. Large. Quiet. The specific quiet of a place where noise happened only when the person at the center of it decided noise was appropriate. Iron gates. Stone walls. The kind of security that did not announce itself. Oscar Thorne was waiting in the main room. He was standing. Healed enough from the shooting to move without visible difficulty, though she noticed the slight adjustment in how he held his left shoulder. He was wearing a dark suit and looking at her with the same focused attention he had used in the alley. "Sit down," he said. "I'd rather stand," she said. He looked at her with an expression she was learning was his version of mild surprise. Most people, she gathered, sat down when Oscar Thorne suggested it. "Your father was Dr. Emmett Adams," he said. The name in his mouth hit her in the chest like a closed fist. She kept her face completely still. "Yes," she said. "He treated people in the South Side clinic regardless of who they were," Oscar said. "Including people who worked for my rivals. Including a man named Reeve Castillo who came to him with a gunshot wound 8 months ago and who talked while he was being treated. Talked about routes. About shipments. About things Castillo should not have been talking about to anyone." Prissy looked at him. "My people visited the clinic," Oscar said. "To retrieve the information. Your people killed him," she said. Her voice was flat and cold and completely even and cost her more to produce than anything she had ever said in her life. "My people exceeded their instructions," he said. "That is not a justification. It is a fact that I am giving you because I believe you deserve accurate information." "How generous," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "You saved my life knowing who I was. I told you. To save everyone. It's a condition. You could have let me die in that alley and called it justice." She said nothing. "The fact that you didn't," he said, "tells me something about you that I find relevant." She looked at him carefully. "What does it tell you?" "That you are more interested in what comes next than in what has already happened," he said. "That you are a person who thinks forward rather than backward." He paused. "That you are practical." "What I am," she said, "is a woman who would like to go home." "You can go home," he said. "After we discuss the arrangement." She went very still. "What arrangement?" He reached into his jacket and placed something on the table between them. A ring. Simple. Platinum. The kind of ring that did not need to announce itself. Prissy looked at the ring. Then at him. Then at the ring again. "No," she said. "I need a wife who is not afraid of me," he said. "In my world that is a considerably smaller category than you might imagine. You sat in an alley in the rain and sutured a gunshot wound on a man you recognized and did not run. That is not a common quality. That is not a reason to marry someone." "I have 17 reasons," he said calmly. "That is simply the most immediate one." "I don't care how many reasons you have," she said. Her voice was rising slightly. She brought it back down. "The answer is no." He looked at her with that expression again. The one that said he found her interesting. Then he said the thing that changed the entire equation. "Your father's clinic had debts," he said. "Significant ones. The building is currently owned by a holding company. That holding company is mine. If you walk out of this room, that building becomes a parking structure by the end of the month." He paused. "If you stay, it reopens as a free community clinic in your father's name. Funded. Permanent." The room was very quiet. Prissy looked at the ring on the table. She thought about her father, who had treated everyone regardless of who they were because he believed medicine was not conditional. who had died for that belief without getting to choose it, whose clinic had sat empty for 8 months because his only daughter could not afford to reopen it alone. She picked up the ring. She did not put it on. She held it in her palm and looked at Oscar Thorne with the steady gaze of a woman making a decision that she understood completely, including all of its hidden costs. "The clinic opens first," she said. "Before any wedding. Before any arrangement. The clinic opens and the deed transfers to a trust in my father's name that you cannot touch." Something shifted in his face. The smallest possible movement. "Agreed," he said. She put the ring on. Her hand was not shaking. But deep in the locked room at the center of herself, something cold and deliberate and patient had just opened its eyes and begun to look around. She found it on a Wednesday. 3 weeks into the marriage. She had not been looking for it. That was the truth. And she held on to the truth carefully because in this house the line between what was real and what she was constructing was something she needed to keep very clear. She had been in his study looking for a pen. His desk had 4 drawers and the top one was unlocked, and she had opened it and found pens and a stapler and a phone charger, and at the very back, under a leather folder, a single sheet of paper that she pulled out without thinking because it was caught under the folder edge and she was trying to free the pen beneath it. She read the first line. She read the second. She put the pen down. At the top of the page, in the clean, precise format of a man who documented everything. Authorization for termination. Subject: Dr. Emmett Adams. Clinic address: Tuesday. Her father's name. Her father's address. The day her father died. Signed at the bottom in a hand she recognized from the contracts she had seen on his desk. Oscar Thorne's signature. She stood at the desk for 1 full minute. She did not cry. She had finished crying for her father in the private hours of the first month, and what had replaced the crying was something quieter and considerably more dangerous. She placed the paper back exactly where she found it. She freed the pen. She closed the drawer. She walked to the window and looked out at the garden where the evening light was fading and the security team was doing its rotation, and the whole estate was moving in the ordinary rhythms of a powerful man's well-organized life. She had suspected. She had known. But suspicion and a signed document were 2 different categories, and now she was standing in the second one. She breathed slowly, in and out. The breathing she used in emergency rooms when the situation required everything she had, and panic was a luxury she could not afford. Then she went to the kitchen and she cooked dinner. A full dinner, 3 courses, the kind her father had loved. And she laid the table carefully and she waited for Oscar to come home. He came in at 7. He looked at the table. He looked at her. Something in his face softened slightly in the way it had been doing with increasing frequency over the 3 weeks of this arrangement. The expression of a man who was accustomed to arriving home to an empty table and had not yet recalibrated to this. "You cooked," he said. "Sit down," she said pleasantly. He sat. She served the food. She poured the wine. She sat across from him and ate with the composed appetite of a woman having a perfectly normal evening. She talked about the clinic. About the new staff member she had interviewed that afternoon. About a patient who had come in with a hand injury and reminded her of a story her father used to tell. She said her father's name easily. Naturally. The way you say the name of someone you miss rather than the way you say the name of someone you are avenging. Oscar listened. Yeah. He looked at her across the table with the expression he had been unable to fully suppress since the alley. The one that said she was the one variable in his life that he could not entirely predict. "Good," said the quiet, cold thing that had opened its eyes 3 weeks ago. "Stay unpredictable." After dinner she cleared the table, and then she picked up the wine glass she had been drinking from and she threw it against the wall. Not at Oscar. The wall. Hard enough that it shattered completely. Fragments scattering across the expensive stone floor. Oscar was on his feet immediately. His hand moved toward the inside of his jacket and then stopped when he processed that the target was the wall. He looked at her. She looked at the broken glass on the floor. "The wine was wrong," she said. Her voice was shaking. Genuinely. "He always said the vintage matters. He said you could taste the difference between a wine made in a good year and one made when the conditions were wrong, and I opened that bottle and I didn't even check the year and he would have." She stopped. She pressed her hand over her mouth. Oscar was still standing. He was watching her with the careful attention of a man who did not know which version of this situation he was inside. "Prissy," he said carefully. "Don't," she said. She walked out of the dining room. She went to her bedroom. She closed the door. She sat on the edge of the bed and pressed both hands over her mouth and breathed. She was not performing the grief. The grief was real. She simply had not told him what the wine year had actually reminded her of. The document in the drawer. Tuesday. She had checked the year on the bottle before she opened it. She had chosen it specifically. She was the best and worst thing that had ever happened to Oscar Thorne. He just did not know it yet. The pattern began and Oscar Thorne, for all his intelligence, walked straight into it. Tuesday mornings she was tender. She brought coffee to his office without being asked. The way he took it, no sugar, dark, slightly too hot. She sat across from him and asked about his work with the focused interest of someone who genuinely wanted to understand it. She remembered details from previous conversations and referenced them accurately. She laughed at things he said, and the laugh was real enough that even she was sometimes startled by it. Tuesday afternoons she asked careful questions. About the business. About the structure. About which accounts handled which operations. She framed them as the questions of a woman trying to understand her husband's world. He answered with the gradual openness of a man who had never had anyone ask without wanting something obvious in return. Wednesday evenings she destroyed something. Not always glass. Sometimes it was a vase. Once it was an entire shelf of files she swept off his office bookcase in the middle of a sentence about something unrelated, then stood looking at the scattered papers with an expression of genuine bewilderment, as if she could not explain even to herself what had just happened. Oscar's head of security, a wide man named Broderick Vell who had been with the organization for 12 years and had the suspicious eyes of someone who had survived that long by trusting nothing, watched her with the focused wariness of a guard dog that has identified a smell it cannot categorize. "She's unstable," Broderick told Oscar on a Thursday. Prissy heard this from the corridor outside the office. She had not been listening on purpose. She had simply learned that in this house standing still in corridors was often more informative than any deliberate investigation. "She's grieving," Oscar said. She threw a vase at the security camera in the east hallway. She was startled by her own reflection. "Sir." "Broderick." Oscar's voice carried the quiet finality of a man closing a topic. "She is my wife. She saved my life. She is adjusting to a significant change in her circumstances. Unless she presents an actual security risk, she is not your concern." Prissy walked away from the corridor with a warmth in her chest that she immediately identified as dangerous and set aside. He defended her. He protected her. He looked at her across rooms with an expression she recognized from medical training. The expression of someone developing an attachment they had not planned for and were not yet ready to name. This was both useful and complicated. She had not expected to feel anything in this house. She had come in with a clear internal architecture. Her mission on one side. Her survival on the other. A clean separation that would allow her to do what needed to be done without losing herself in the process. She had not accounted for the way he listened when she talked about her father. Not performing attention. Actually listening, with the focused stillness of someone who understood that what was being given was significant. She had not accounted for the coffee. On the morning of the 4th week she came down to the kitchen and found coffee already made. Way. Strong with 1 spoon of honey, in the wide ceramic mug she had chosen from the cabinet on her second day. He had left for a meeting. The coffee was waiting. No note. Just the coffee. She stood in the kitchen looking at it for longer than was reasonable. Then she drank it. Then she went to his office and spent 4 hours reviewing the shipping manifests she had asked him to share with her 3 days earlier. She photographed 40 pages. She sent them to an encrypted address she had created 6 months before ever setting foot in this house. Then she went to find something to break. The financial access came in the 6th week. She had not pushed for it. Pushing would have been suspicious. Instead she had allowed it to arrive naturally through the logic of the situation she had been constructing. A wife who understood medicine and numbers. A wife who asked intelligent questions about the business structure. A wife who, during her calmer phases, had demonstrated a facility for identifying inefficiencies in the clinic's operational budget that had saved them money 3 months running. Oscar mentioned during one of their Tuesday conversations that the Eastern portfolio was being mismanaged by the man he had assigned to it. Prissy said nothing. She only looked slightly interested. The following Tuesday he asked if she would look at it. She said she would try but that she was not a financial expert. He said she was more capable than half the people he employed. She looked at him with the expression she had practiced, the one that contained equal parts surprise and reluctant pleasure, the expression of a woman being seen accurately by someone she had not given permission to see her accurately. She took the files. She spent 6 days doing exactly what she said she would do. She found 3 genuine inefficiencies. She corrected them. She presented the corrections clearly and accurately, and watched Oscar read them with the expression of a man whose instinct about a person has just been confirmed. In the 7th week he gave her broader access. Not to everything. Oscar Thorne had not survived this long by being careless. But to enough. To the Eastern accounts and the property holdings and the investment structures that moved money between visible and invisible parts of the organization. Enough to find the account that held $40 million in liquid assets. Enough to understand the authorization structure. Enough to move $50 million to an account she had established 2 years before her father's death when she first began to understand, peripherally, the world that brushed against the edges of his clinic. She authorized the transfer on a Wednesday morning during her calm phase. Clean, documented. Formatted exactly as Oscar's own authorizations were formatted. She moved it through 3 intermediate accounts in a sequence that would take a skilled forensic accountant. Approximately 3 weeks to trace. Wednesday evening she locked herself in the bathroom and screamed into a towel for 4 minutes because she had found a photograph on Oscar's desk that morning. Her father and a man she did not recognize, both younger, both smiling, standing outside the clinic building. She came out of the bathroom and found Oscar in the corridor. He looked at her reddened eyes. He did not ask. He simply stood in the corridor with that attentive stillness he had. "I found a photograph," she said. "An old one. In your desk." He went carefully still. "My father," she said. "Do you know where it came from?" Long pause. Something moved in his face that she could not entirely read. "Come downstairs," he said quietly. "I'll tell you." She followed him to the study. He opened the desk drawer. He took out the photograph and placed it on the desk. He also took out another document and placed it beside the photograph. She looked at the second document. It was a letter. Handwritten. Addressed to Oscar Thorne. It was her father's handwriting. She knew every loop and angle of it from a lifetime of reading his notes. The letter said that Dr. Emmett Adams understood that his clinic had treated Reeve Castillo. That he had reported this to the authorities. That if anything happened to him, this letter would be released along with documentation he had secured with a solicitor. It was dated the Monday before her father died. Her father had known. He had known the visit was coming and he had tried to protect himself the only way he had available. "He sent this letter to me," Oscar said. His voice was level but something underneath it was not. "I received it the day after he died. My people had moved before I had the opportunity to respond to it." Prissy looked at the letter in her father's handwriting. "You would have stopped it," she said. Not a question. An assessment. She was looking at the information with the clinical precision she applied to everything. "I gave instructions that he was not to be harmed," Oscar said. Those instructions arrived late. The room was very quiet. This changed nothing about what she was doing. It changed nothing about the $50 million in the untraceable account, or the shipping manifests she had photographed, or the meeting she had scheduled for the following week with a federal investigator her father had trusted. Changed everything about how she felt while she was doing it. She picked up the letter. She read her father's handwriting one more time. Then she set it down carefully on the desk. "Keep it," she said. "It belongs in that drawer." She walked out. In the corridor she stopped and pressed her back against the wall and closed her eyes. The cold, deliberate thing inside her was still there, still moving forward, still doing what it had come here to do. But it was doing it now with something complicated wrapped around it. Something she had not packed when she came in. Something that felt, inconveniently and against all available logic, like grief for a different loss than the one she had arrived carrying. The Mafia summit was held on a Friday. 40 of the city's most dangerous people in one room, which Prissy understood made it either the safest or most dangerous room in the city depending on which way the evening went. Oscar had not wanted her to come. She had been calmly, persistently present at the door when the car arrived until he looked at her with that expression of resigned acknowledgement and stood aside. She wore a red dress. Not loud. The specific red of something that did not need to announce itself but could not be ignored. She sat beside Oscar at the main table. She drank her wine slowly. She smiled at the correct moments. She was the picture of a composed, elegant woman supporting her husband in a professional context. Across the table sat a man named Corvus Reed. Thin, pale, with the watchful eyes of someone who had built his position on information rather than force. He ran the southern quarter and he had been encroaching on Oscar's western routes for 3 months. Corvus looked at her the way men like him looked at wives of men like Oscar. As furniture. As decoration. As something present but not relevant. She let him think that for the first 2 hours. Then during a break between the formal discussions she picked up her wine glass and walked to where Corvus was standing with 2 of his associates, and she looked at him with the steady gaze of someone who has decided that this is the moment. "Your cargo delay on the river route last month," she said conversationally. "The one you blamed on the harbor authority. That was a customs tip, wasn't it?" Corvus looked at her. She smiled pleasantly. "My husband's Western dock shipments run through the same authority contact. If that contact has been compromised, it affects both your operations." She tilted her head. "I thought you should know." Corvus stared at her. "How do you know about the river route?" he asked carefully. "My husband trusts me," she said simply. "As you can see." She gestured toward where Oscar was standing across the room, watching this conversation with a particular expression of a man who is not certain what he is watching. She walked back to her seat. 3 things happened in the following 20 minutes that she had intended to happen. Corvus pulled 2 of his people into a private conversation that lasted 8 minutes, during which the discussion was animated enough that Broderick Vell noticed and flagged it to Oscar. Oscar spent the rest of the evening watching Corvus with the cool, focused assessment of a man recalculating his threat assessment. And during the 8 minutes when everyone was watching Corvus, Prissy sat beside Broderick's vacated seat and had a quiet 3-minute conversation with a man named Saul Adder, Corvus's financial manager, who had been drinking steadily since arrival and who, when a composed woman in a red dress asked him thoughtful questions about the river route operation, told her considerably more than he would have sober, and at a formal meeting where his guard was fully raised. She did not write anything down. She remembered everything. On the way home, Oscar looked at her in the car for a long time without speaking. "What did you say to Corvus?" he asked finally. "I told him his river route might have a compromised customs contact," she said. "Why?" "Because it might," she said. "And because watching you 2 watch each other for the rest of the evening was more interesting than the speeches." He looked at her. "You are genuinely the most unpredictable person I have ever encountered," he said. She looked out the window at the city moving past. "I know," she said. 2 weeks before the end, she became very still. Not the performed stillness of earlier months. Real stillness. The stillness of someone who has completed the preparation and is now simply waiting for the correct moment to execute. The financial transfers were complete. 4 of them across 6 weeks. Structured carefully enough that the trail would require months to unravel, and by then she would be unreachable. The shipping manifests and the operational documents were with the federal investigator, delivered through an intermediary, sufficient to trigger an investigation that would dismantle the organization's visible structure methodically and permanently. The clinic deed was in the trust. Permanent. His signature already on it. Obtained 3 weeks into the marriage when she had asked him to finalize the paperwork. She had stood beside him while he signed and watched his hand and thought about her father's handwriting on that letter, and kept her face completely still. She had done everything she came to do. She had also, in the process of doing it, developed a complication she had not anticipated and could not fully resolve. She lay awake in the nights of the final 2 weeks looking at the ceiling of the room that was hers in this house and trying to organize her feelings with the same precision she applied to everything else. She could not. What she felt about Oscar Thorne did not organize. It sat in her chest in a complicated shape that contained grief and anger and something warmer than either that she refused to name, and the specific quality of sadness that comes from seeing a person clearly and finding them better than you needed them to be for the plan to be clean. He was not a good man. The document in the drawer with her father's name on it was the permanent evidence of that. The world he had built was built on damage and threat and the specific violence of a system that crushed ordinary people when they became inconvenient. He was also the man who defended her to Broderick when Broderick called her unstable. Who left coffee made her way without a note. Who had received a letter from her father warning him and had tried, too late, to stop what was coming. Who had kept the photograph. Who had kept the letter. Who had told her the truth about both when he could have said nothing. None of this changed what she was going to do. But it changed what it cost her to do it. On the last Tuesday evening she went to him. She sat beside him in the study where he was working late. She did not bring information. She did not ask questions. She simply sat in the chair across from his and looked at her hands. "My father would have liked this house," she said quietly. He had a thing about old stone. He said buildings with history in their walls felt more honest than new ones. Oscar set his pen down. "He sounds like a man who paid attention to things other people didn't notice," he said. "He was exactly that," she said. Silence. Not uncomfortable. "You miss him every day," Oscar said. It was not a question. "Every single one," she said. He looked at her across the desk. "I am sorry, Prissy. For his death. The words are insufficient and I know it. But they are true." She looked at him for a long time. She thought about what was coming. About the morning 2 weeks from now when the people she had been working with since before she ever went into that alley would move. About the moment when everything would be finished and she would walk out of this house with her father's name on a clinic deed and 4 accounts of evidence in federal hands and the quiet satisfaction of a thing completed. She thought about what it would cost. What she would leave behind. She stood up. She walked to the door of the study. She stopped with her hand on the frame. "Oscar," she said. He looked up. "The coffee in the morning," she said. "The way I take it. You remembered from the first week." He said nothing. He simply looked at her. She nodded slightly, as if confirming something to herself. Then she walked out. She spent the day before the end in the clinic. She had done this every week since it opened. Not because it was required. Because it was the most real part of her life inside this existence she had built from strategy and patience and controlled grief. Because in the clinic she was Dr. Prissy Adams, her father's daughter, the woman who had learned medicine from a man who believed it was not conditional, and everything else went quiet. She treated 6 patients. She helped a junior doctor with a complicated diagnosis. She stood in her father's old office, which they had kept exactly as it was, and she looked at the framed photographs on the wall, and she let herself feel everything she had been carefully not feeling for months. She stayed until the evening. When she came home the house was quiet. Oscar was in the study. She could see the light under the door. She stood in the hallway for a moment. Then she went upstairs. She packed 1 bag. Only what was hers. The photograph of her father from her bedside table. The notebook she had carried since her first year of medical school, full of her father's observations written in the margins when he used to borrow it to teach her things. The medical bag she had carried into the alley the night everything began. She did not pack the ring. She took it off and held it in her palm for a moment. The plain platinum band that she had put on in this man's study with her hand not shaking. She set it on the bedside table. Then she disabled the biometric alarm on the east gate. Not the front gate. The east gate that she had been studying for 3 months. the one that connected to the property's exterior access, and that her contacts would use in the morning when everything moved. She did it with 4 keystrokes on the secondary security panel in the linen corridor, the one Broderick had shown her access to in the second week when she asked about household management systems. She had remembered every code. She always remembered every code. She went to bed. She lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling and breathed carefully. She did not sleep. At 2 in the morning she heard Oscar's footsteps in the corridor. She heard them pause outside her door. Long pause. Then continue on. She closed her eyes. She thought about her father saying the buildings with history in their walls felt more honest than new ones. She thought about the coffee. She thought about the document in the drawer with its clean formal signature, and her father's address and the word terminate. She held both things at the same time. The man and his crime. The warmth and the damage. The letter he had kept and the order he had signed. Both things were real. Both things were true. She had come here to do something that needed to be done. She had done it. The doing of it had cost her something she had not budgeted for. That was the final truth of this house, and she would carry it out with her in the morning along with the medical bag and the notebook and the photograph. She was in the kitchen at 6 when he came downstairs. He stopped in the doorway. He looked at her. Then at the bag beside the kitchen table. Silence. "You're leaving," he said, not a question. Oscar Thorne had not survived this long by being slow to read a room. She turned to face him. She had prepared a speech. A clear, organized statement that explained the transfer of funds and the evidence in federal hands and the East Gate and the reason for all of it. She had prepared it the way she prepared everything, carefully and completely, with every contingency considered. She looked at him across the kitchen and the speech dissolved. "The clinic is mine," she said. "The deed is in the trust. That holds regardless of whatever comes next." He looked at her. "What comes next?" She breathed once. "Federal investigators received documentation 4 days ago. Shipping records. Account structures. Enough to open a formal investigation into the organization's operations." He paused. "They move this morning." The kitchen was completely silent. Oscar looked at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not anger. Not the cold calculation of a man assessing a threat. Something else. Something that required more stillness to produce. "How long?" he said. "Since before the alley," she said. "I had been preparing for 8 months before we met. The alley was not planned. You were not supposed to survive that night." Something moved in his jaw. "But I did." "But you did," she said. "And I could not walk past you." "Your condition," he said. The ghost of the almost smile from the alley. "Even now. Even here." "My condition," she said. He looked at the bag. At the ring that was not on her hand. He looked at her face for a long time with the expression of a man doing the most accurate reading of a room he had ever had to do. "The coffee," he said. "You knew from the first week how I took mine." She held his gaze. "Yes. But you still let me make yours." She said nothing. "Because it was real," he said quietly. Not accusing. Naming. She looked at him across the kitchen. She thought about everything she had done in this house and everything it had cost her and everything she was about to walk away from and what she was walking toward. "Some of it was real," she said. It was the most honest thing she had said in 8 months. "More of it than I planned." He was quiet. Then he moved to the counter. He turned on the kettle. He took down her ceramic mug. He made her coffee the way she took it, strong with 1 spoon of honey, without looking at her, with the focused attention of someone doing something for the last time and wanting to do it correctly. He placed it on the table. He looked at her. "Drink your coffee, Prissy," he said. His voice was rough. "Before it gets cold." She sat down. She picked up the mug with both hands. Outside, at the East Gate, she heard the sound of vehicles arriving. She drank the coffee. The clinic opened every morning at 8. Prissy arrived at 7:45, as she always did. She unlocked the front door herself, as she always did. She stood for a moment inside the entrance looking at the walls. Her father had painted that specific shade of pale yellow because he said it made the waiting room feel less like waiting. She set her bag down. She put on her coat. She went to the first patient. The investigation had moved fast. The federal case was built on documentation solid enough that the organization's upper structure had collapsed within 3 weeks of the initial filing. Oscar's lawyers were skilled, and the process would take years to fully resolve. But the visible empire, the properties and accounts and front businesses, had been frozen immediately. The clinic trust held. Her father's name was above the door. The deed was untouchable. She had heard through the investigator that Oscar had not attempted to flee or destroy evidence when the federal teams arrived. He had opened the door himself and asked to see the documentation before saying anything. The investigator had mentioned this with the professional neutrality of someone reporting a fact that did not change the legal situation but was worth noting. She noted it. She noted a great many things in the weeks after she walked out of that kitchen. The way the city looked different when you were no longer moving through it as someone performing a version of yourself. The way the clinic felt different when you were not carrying something underneath every conversation. The way sleep came differently when the planning was finished. She noted the absence of coffee made her way waiting in a kitchen in the mornings. She did not allow herself to spend excessive time on that particular noting. On a Thursday evening 3 months after the morning it ended, she was locking up the clinic when she found an envelope on the doorstep. Plain white. No postmark. Her name in handwriting she recognized. She stood on the clinic steps and held it for a moment. The evening was cold and still, and the streetlight above her was doing its best. She opened it. Inside was the photograph. Her father and the younger unrecognized man smiling outside the clinic building. On the back, in Oscar's handwriting, Emmett Adams and my father. 1987. They were friends before either of us existed. She turned the photograph over. Her father's face. Young, relaxed, genuinely happy in the way of someone who does not know yet what is coming. There was nothing else in the envelope. No message. No request. No signature. She stood on the steps of her father's clinic holding the photograph for a long time. The streetlight above her hummed its quiet note. She thought about the alley. About the rain and the suture kit and the man on the wet concrete, whose life she could not walk past without saving because she had been born with a condition she had never once successfully overridden. She thought about a signed document and a cup of coffee and a building with history in its walls. She slid the photograph into the pocket of her coat. She picked up her bag. She walked forward into the quiet evening. Not running. Not hiding. Not performing, just walking. A woman with her father's name above a door behind her, and an unresolved photograph in her pocket, and the particular knowledge of someone who has done the thing they came to do and discovered that endings are almost never as clean as the plans that build toward them. Her father would have understood that. He had always said the most honest buildings were the ones with the most complicated histories. She was beginning to think the same was true of people. To everyone who has ever had to choose between justice and something that felt like love, both things can be real at the same time. The choice does not stop either from being true. And to everyone who has ever kept walking forward when the ground behind them was complicated, that is not running away. That is called surviving with your eyes open. If this story reached you, please like, share, and leave a comment below. Tell us which moment stayed with you longest. Take care of yourselves. We will see you in the next story.